I'm here with Bob Dickinson, and today we're going to be talking about decanting, which is probably the most key process of the wine appreciation. We'll discuss this in great detail. A little background, first of all, on Bob Dickinson. Bob was the past president and CEO of Carnival Cruise Lines. More importantly, he's been my mentor in life and in wine and in significance, and we'll talk a little bit about that hopefully in this segment as well. Bob is a member of Bacchus, a world-famous wine group. He's a member of the Commanderie de Bordeaux. He's also a member of the International Wine and Food, and he's known throughout the wine world for his expertise and great palate. Today we're going to start with the process of decanting, and I want to start, Bob, with why decanting?
So, to get the maximum out of a bottle of wine, you want to make sure that the wine in your glass is pure and clean and devoid of all sediment. Sediment results from the process of making the wine. It's the residuals of the seeds, pips, and skins that eventually falls out of suspension and forms along the side of the glass. If you were to take that sediment, which is caught in a filter, then taste it, it would taste like the tannins of a leather belt. It's very bitter, it's acrid, and when it's in a wine, it's like looking at a beautiful woman through a dirty glass window. You're not seeing the woman in all her glory.
Like a Monet.
Like a Monet, perhaps, yes. Good example. So, there's a right way and a wrong way to decant wine. And unfortunately, in my experience, 95% of the people that I know outside of the Miami area do it, and I believe, the wrong way. They do what I call the English method. They take a bottle, they stand it up for a day or two. If they're really proud and smug about themselves, they stand it up for a week. Problem when you stand up a bottle is the sediment that has fallen out of suspension and is clinging to the bottom goes back into suspension. Because that sediment is heavy, it falls to the bottom. As it falls and moves, the lighter part of that sediment gets disturbed and sits in suspension. It takes a year or more to get that back to a pure state. And a week isn't going to do it, a day isn't going to do it. Now, because people learn what they call the English method, this has been in our culture and the French culture as well for years and years and years. And the process of unlearning that has been daunting. And people I know that I've talked them through it, so on and so forth, they think I'm crazy. The easy way to prove it, though, is that you take two bottles from the same case, you do it my way, you do it your way, and you judge the difference. And I've done this so many times with people, and then they finally have an aha moment. Now, we're going to see it, we're going to go through it, and it's a process that seems daunting at the beginning, but after you've done it 3 or 4 times, it's like riding a bike or making love. It's easy, it becomes second nature to you.
You know, Bob, it sort of reminds me of the great saying from Orson Welles, with Paul Masson, if you remember, we will serve no wine before it's time. We will not serve any wine unless it's decanted properly.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So tell us about the wine we're going to decant today and a little bit about the wine.
Like yourself, I'm blessed to have an extensive wine cellar. I picked a 2015 Cabernet. This is a very young wine. Normally, I would not drink this yet. It's in my taste. I like to hold it at least 10 to 15 years. But I picked the 2015 because you're going to see sediment in this bottle. And even though this was released 3 years ago, it's already thrown a sediment. It already has dirt in it. So imagine we were opening a 2000 Bordeaux, a 1971 Le Cancillon, 1961 your birth year, maybe a Pavie. And imagine all the sediment in those bottles, because the longer the bottle sits, the more sediment drops out. to the point where if you have a bottle, we opened a week and a half ago an 1893 Lafite, which was actually an 1883 Lafite. So a bottle over 100 years old has an amazing amount of sediment to the point where the wine looks almost pale in color, like you could read the newspaper through it. So we want to remove that sediment, and that's the whole purpose of decanting.
I see you're opening one of my favorites, a Greer.
Yeah. Well, we both are blessed to know Rob Greer for a number of years. He has extraordinary dirt. He's got a great winemaker and Aaron Pop. And this is one of my favorites, and I know it's one of yours as well.
Unbelievable juice, great juice. So my faithful followers, I can't wait to show you the process and Bob to teach us a little something about decanting.
The important thing here is that all these bottles are kept labeled square up. Why is that important? Because then I know exactly where the sediment is accumulating on the opposite side of the label on the bottom. All right? So we handle it like a young baby. We don't want to disturb that sediment at all. It's been sitting in the wine cellar for 3 years in this case, because it's a young Cabernet. It's only a 2015. It's a baby, but we're showing it as an example. So here we go. The first rule of thumb is we never, did I say never? I can't say never enough. We never stand up a bottle. Once you stand up a bottle, all of the sediment that's been residing on the bottom for the last three years starts to cascade through the wine, something called Brownian movement. And you end up with colloidal suspension. All the particles are sort of mixed up in the wine becomes instantly dirty. Whether you stand it up for 5 days or 5 weeks, it's never going to be as clean as this bottle that's been resting for 3 years. Now imagine if that was an older bottle, let's say a 71 Le Cancillon. There'll be 6 or 7 times the amount of sediment. And the handling of that bottle becomes more and more important because of all that sediment. So standing up that bottle is really, really the wrong thing to do. Now the unfortunate thing is the English, who've been claret lovers for centuries, have always stood up bottles. And to unlearn that from people is it's been a chore that I've been spending 50-some years trying to educate. And there's a lot of people that frankly resist it. All I can say is try it both ways. Take 2 identical bottles, stand up one, use the other with my method, look at it through a sharp light, and you'll immediately see the difference. All right, so the next step is to use this tool and remove the foil. Why do we remove the foil? Because the foil in 95% of the cases is lead. And alcohol leaches the lead out, and it can go into the wine, and it ultimately, when you drink as much wine as I do, that's accumulating poisons in your body. And we take a corkscrew. This is a very simple one. You can use any number, whatever you like. For older bottles, I would use this because the cork would be likely to crumble. I use this one, which is a screw. You never want to use one that has filled it in the middle. That's called an auger. That's very easy to strip the cork and just leave a hole in the center. So you want to use one that it's hollow in the center. Okay. So at this point, Notice the wine is in the basket, undisturbed. That basket is an angle of about 30 degrees. I'm holding on to the bottle firmly so it's not moving. All right, so the cork is now free from the bottle. And I remove that. Make sure there's nothing loose on the inside of the neck or the outside of the neck. All right, and now we are ready to go. You need a funnel. First of all, of course, you need a decanter. The decanter should be wide enough so that when the wine is in the decanter, it creates a large surface for the wine to receive oxygen. And we need a funnel to capture the wine that's coming out of the bottle, so we make sure it all goes in the decanter. Then this is a steel mesh which will capture any loose piece of cork. In this case, if you look closely at this, there's a little niche missing. So this mesh will catch that piece if it doesn't stay in the bottle. Sometimes it stays in the bottle, sometimes it doesn't, but I don't want it to get into the wine. Okay, so the wine has been laying in the basket carefully. I now start to pour it very, very slowly. And I'm watching very carefully to see anything moving. Right now, everything is lodged into place. The sediment is undisturbed. The reason for that is it's a cold cellar, and over time, the sediment clings to the bottle. So at this point, I'm going to put this filter here. I'm going to hold it down for a second till it starts to pour. Now there's more in here. See it? So this is not a lot of dirt because most of it stuck to the side of the bottle. However, if this bottle was stood up, that wouldn't stick to the side of the bottle because as the bottle warmed, it would fall to the bottom and in the process dissipate and make the whole wine cloudy. Let's see how clear this wine is. It's almost like a ruby, isn't it? See how clear that is?
So, Bob, one of the things that I know really pisses both you and I off, can you describe your feelings and thoughts of people bringing wine to an event or a restaurant and the biggest mistakes you can make doing such?
There are a lot of annoyances. Perhaps the greatest annoyance is to have, do a boys' night, for example, and there's a new person in the crowd.
Or a girls' night.
Or a girls' night. That doesn't know how to decant wine. So they bring a trophy wine from their cellar, they plunk it on the table, and it's unopened. Now they drove 10 minutes, whatever, bumpy roads, turns, one thing and another. That wine is mud. And the older and more treasured the bottle is, the more mud it is. So I've had this happen with 82 Cheval Blanc. Gorgeous wine, and it was just mud. I've had it happen with younger wines. Recently, we both experienced a 2005 Cheval Blanc that just was not at its best because people didn't know any better. The second biggest annoyance is people don't give the wine enough air. So we're at a boys' night, somebody presents a trophy wine.
Or a girls' night.
Or girls' night, and they've not given it enough air. So we're not seeing the wine at its best. So it's a beautiful wine. By the time we're leaving, maybe the wine's showing its stuff, but most everybody's drunk it by then. So what I do is I take it, bite my tongue, I put it off to the side. I might sip it a little bit just so that nobody's catching on. And maybe by dessert, that one glass will come around.
So a big fallacy to that point you just made is some people think that they've decanted a wine by just cleaning it, putting it in a decanter, and then pouring it right back in a bottle. But really, it really hasn't had much air at that point. Tell me what you think about decanting. What is really decanting?
So decanting has two purposes. One, to get a clean wine. Two, to create the opportunity to have an exchange with the wine and air so that the wine softens and the aromatics come up as the wine moves from cellar temperature closer to room temperature.
A lot of us buy our wines at auction and through other houses, and we get them delivered from the vineyards themselves. How long should a bottle lay down before we should be able to drink that bottle after receiving it?
I try and lay my bottles down for 2 years. Made an exception in this case because we wanted to show a young wine. Any less than that, it's just starting to get a little bit less wine that's fallen out, a little more in suspension. So the wine is not as pure as it could be. I think 2 years tends to be the limit. I've had the most success with that, whether it's an older wine or a younger one.
Many of us travel with our wines. I know you and I both do, and we're about to get on a cruise, and we're going to bring our wines with us. What's the best way to travel with wine so we're not taking muddy juice with us on the way?
We start by decanting the wine. We give it about as much air, maybe 15, 20 minutes less air than we would if we were serving it that night. Rinse out the bottle with cold water. If it's an old or precious wine, use a little distilled water after that. Let the bottle drain on a paper towel so there's no liquid in the bottle. Use the funnel again, pour the wine back in the bottle. And then I recork the bottle, as you do. I have a corking machine. It's not expensive at all. You get a supply of 100 corks. You manually put the cork in the bottle. It's a fresh cork. It has no odor. And that wine can keep for months or years. But it's clean at that point. So I'm going up in an airplane. I'm coming down the airplane. I have pressure change. I have temperature change. We're going to fly into St. Martin's. We're going to have a nice bottle at lunch in St. Bart's the next day. That wine's going to be pristine. So with an older wine, let's say a 55 Aubailly, when you put the wine back in the bottle, you may have ullage that's mid-shoulder or low shoulder, whatever. And let's say we're packing for a 2-week trip on Seabourn to the Med. And I may have decanted this wine a week before we even start traveling. So by the time we have the bottle, it might be as much as 3 weeks later. So to your point, with that much air in the bottle, that aeration process continues and the wine could be deader than Kelsey's nuts. So what we do is we put clean marbles in the bottle, and over a period of, let's say, 15, 20 marbles, depending on the size, that displaces the air, and we stop it when the wine comes up into the neck. So the wine is getting no more air than I wanted it to. Then we put in the fresh cork. I've had wines where I've actually had a trip cancel on me. I put the wine aside. I had it a year later, totally fine.
Beautiful.
Clean as a bell.
Fantastic.
Now, there is one side effect. You have to explain to the sommelier on the cruise ship or the resort exactly what's happening. And in the old days, when you could do wine in your carry-on, I had to explain to different people what was happening there too, because it looks pretty weird to have all these little dark things floating in the bottle. Plus, it makes some pretty bizarre sounds.
Again, back to Orson Welles' comment, we will serve no wine before it's time. Tell me the other reason why we decant wine.
The other reason to decant wine is to aerate the wine. The wine's been cooped up in a bottle for a number of years, and it sort of needs to get out and stretch and really show its stuff. So a young wine like this, I'd give typically 3 hours of air. Barolos, for example, the older they get, they seem to need tons of air. It's not uncommon to give it 5 or 6 hours. So to drink it without giving it air is not to, it's sort of like looking at a rosebud that's closed instead of one that's in full flower.